Hello and welcome back to Ramped Up, the podcast all about disability. My name is Little Brighouse.
And my name is Julia Shenko.
And we are talking today to Councillor Little, who, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I am a new county councillor. I was elected this May in the local elections for Powys, which is a complete new direction for me. I previously and currently am a student studying neuroscience and psychology of mental health as my main line. So juggling two pathways at once.
So that sounds quite stressful. How is it that you got into politics then? What started that off?
A number of factors, mostly around injustice, to be honest with you, because of the lack of accessibility to the mental health service, the way in which DWP PIP assessments are conducted and how that's impacted people that I've known. For example, my father was one of the many hundreds of thousands of people deemed fit for work by the DWP who unfortunately died 11 months later. So one of those statistics, and it's events like this that made me realise it's the policies that are governing every aspect of every service that we use that are creating these barriers. And I got fed up with it and lost my temper because marching in protests and signing petitions wasn't enough anymore. I was headhunted by one of the local Liberal Democrats and kind of asked to join them for a couple of years before I made the decision. And it was the breakdown of the mental health service nationally that was the final straw for me. Lost a number of friends through suicide, unfortunately, over the last couple of years. And yeah, I found out there was an election going, so I went, well, why not? Threw my name in the hat. Had no expectation or intention of winning, and yet here I am.
So how was that sort of, I don't want to say half-heartedly, but just sort of going in and then it turns out, oh crap, you're now a councillor. How was that? How was that realisation?
I think I was in shock for about 3 days, and the words, "This can't be true, this can't be real," was just on repeat like a broken record. It's still not quite sunk in yet. And it's been definitely an eye-opening experience and a very steep learning curve. But it's been quite enjoyable at the same time. And it's opened up a lot of doorways so that I'm able to start, instead of shouting and screaming and petitioning for policy change, I can help influence that change and implement that change myself. Fair enough, it's only on a local level. But if I can make a difference locally to just one person's life, it's worthwhile.
How long have you been activism? Is that a word?
Activist. I've been in protests and petitions since I was a very young teenager. I started getting interested in social causes just before my teen years, and around about 15 years old, I remember a news report coming on the TV. I think it was on Good Morning Today or whatever it was back then, about a young girl in Palestine and about the conflict there. And she inspired me, the strength and the bravery and the courage to stand up to oppression like that. And that's what started it really for me. I've always been shouting and screaming about social injustices and, making things fair. I've got very, very little tolerance for discrimination and prejudice. I'm very outwardly outspoken, as Joel, you've seen on TikTok,
Yeah.
I can be very vocal.
You're ready to speak out.
Yes. Lost a few accounts for calling people out on such behaviours.
They deserve it, let's be honest. Anyone who's responsible for a person's life should be held accountable to certain things, I think.
Yeah. I think accountability is a major factor that we have to, I think, re-establish in society. It's not practiced enough these days. In the online community I run for Trauma Network, one of the things that we do preach a lot is accountability. It's impact over intent every time.
Mm-hmm.
If you're it doesn't matter if your intent is to make good positive change in politics for the better of other people, if the impact is having a detrimental effect, then you need to change things. And so taking about accountability for that and for your position and the people that you're looking after, it's a major factor that I think gets overlooked sometimes.
So you've been not only a politician, but you're studying at the moment, aren't you?
Yeah.
How's juggling that?
Well, studying is more part of my normal everyday life for me. Before I enrolled onto the formal education, I've always used study as a coping mechanism. So when life gets too stressful or too overwhelming, I'll dive into the internet. I'll pick a subject that I don't know much about, but I've got some interest, and I'll start deep diving and accessing different databases and libraries, and I devour knowledge. So attending university was, I suppose, going to happen at some point. So it's kind of become a normal everyday part of my life. I don't really think much about, to be honest. It was the decision to go into university was a coping mechanism, because I'd recently had a mental health breakdown. It was towards the end of 2017. I just ended a very abusive relationship. I had a mental health breakdown in which I became suicidal. And a month later, my dad was diagnosed with stage 3 terminal lung cancer. So very stressful and a traumatic year for me. And I needed something to focus on, to give me little goals in the present time to focus on, and a longer goal for something I could focus on for after all of these big, really life-changing events had come and gone. And so I enrolled for a certificate of higher education with the Open University. Didn't think I would finish the first year, because I have a really bad habit of picking up a project and putting it down and starting another one. I ended up finishing that year, got a first class in that.
Oh, wow.
And decided to go on for my bachelor's degree, which in total, if I had done it part-time, as you should do with the Open University, should have taken me 6 years, but I did the double course, full-time hours, and completed my bachelor's degree in another 2 years.
Wow.
Again, with the first class honours and acceptance into King's College London.
Wow.
So university, accessing university and studying has very much saved my life, really. And it's given me something to work towards, and it's a constructive aspect for me to use as a coping mechanism, because it gives me something back. Those that knowledge, those achievements, those certificates open more doors to better paying careers, to the areas of work where I really want to be. So it's beneficial in more than one way than just being a coping mechanism, and it's helped me rebuild my life in the process. So yeah, it has been the number one priority for me, so I don't really juggle things around my education. I don't juggle my education around everything else. I juggle my life around my education. That comes first and foremost. So yeah, anything else gets put to one side if necessary.
Fair enough. So you described university as a coping mechanism, but what coping mechanisms have you had put in place at uni in order to help you? Have you needed any special access?
Yeah, so one of the major symptoms that I experience on a day-to-day basis is a very severe level of dissociation, which is almost like being in a very heavy daydream sometimes. And so because I dissociate, I can lose track of time a lot. And meeting deadlines is a challenge with my brain, unfortunately. And so I definitely had to reach out to the support team at the Open University, and they were amazing. I told them about my diagnosis and my mental health and my history, and they were very understanding and empathetic with me. They arranged for me to have extensions on every single one of my pieces of coursework throughout my entire degree. And I was allowed mitigating circumstances if I couldn't meet those deadlines as well. And there was one-to-one tuition available. So if I really did struggle processing the text that I was reading, because that again is another challenge that I face is processing information. Especially when it's written down, like reading through those very heavy psychological textbooks. The words jump across the page, and it can take me quite a while to read a chapter, and sometimes I'll have to read it 3 or 4 times before I'll process it and absorb it. So the university granted me a lot more time than I would have had if I didn't have these difficulties, and that gave me the space so I wasn't so stressed and under pressure with those deadlines. And my tutors were absolutely amazing, especially in the final 2 years. Like any problems I had, I could email them, and they would make sure that there was the things in place that I needed. And of course, there's the DSA, which is available to students across the UK, which is Disability Students Allowance. I'm looking at accessing some of those with King's actually to help me with note taking and collecting that information so that I can conduct my essays and coursework without too much more difficulty than before. So the adaptions and my disability, it's definitely been a learning process as I've been going along the journey. So when I've come across a barrier, I've gone, oh, I didn't realize this was a challenge because I've not been part of this world before. I very much shut myself away, agoraphobic, wouldn't interact with anyone or talk to anyone. So learning to walk and talk and interact with the world was a thing, and learning to figure out where my limitations are with my disabilities is still a journey that I'm on now. So with my education, it's deadlines, that's a barrier that's popped up multiple times, so I'm aware of it now, whereas when I started I wasn't. So it's still a learning curve, and it's the same as my county council work. I can sit here and go, well, I know these are barriers and these are challenges I have because of my disabilities and my mental health. But there's things that have cropped up that I've gone, I didn't realize that was a challenge. I need to get some support for this. So, but again, the support is readily available, and they've got an amazing team locally. So I think it's definitely having a good support network around you is key. I wouldn't have got to where I am today if it wasn't for the services that I do have around me, and the friends and family that have encouraged and supported me along the way too.
So it sounds like you had a very good experience with education, which makes a change from what we've heard.
Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything that you wish could have been better with your uni experience?
Well, the process of actually accessing a lot of the help that's external from the university I found very difficult. Like the DSA forms, they ask you to go see your medical professional and get them to sign off on it and all of this. And I don't think a lot of people creating these forms understand that for some disabled people, even leaving their house to see their practitioner to sign that document is a barrier for them, and so they can't complete that form and get access to that support. So there's definitely issues there that I've faced myself. It's one of the reasons why I still haven't actually applied for DSA, is because the process itself and collecting that evidence, especially when it is primarily an invisible disability, trying to get your GP to understand when you're working with the mental health service, it's like talking two different languages, and trying to get that documentation together is definitely something that I'd like to see changed and made more accessible for people.
I think that's what kind of sets people away from doing university, especially for disabled people, that DSA is just extensive, incredibly extensive. I applied for it last year in January, and I didn't get approved until a few weeks ago.
Wow.
So it has been incredibly extensive, and what doesn't help either is that people, like for me, I have a processing as well disability, as well as a physical disability in a chair. So people understand the physical side, but kind of brush away the invisible disability. And that's kind of disheartening for someone like me, because I want an education and continue having an education. It's just the whole understanding. People just don't understand as well as they should, even though they themselves are a medical professional.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people can focus too much on one type, and you go, well, you've got one type, so why do you have another type? You don't see that there can be multiple types in the same person.
People don't realize that things can be connected at any point. You don't have only one category of many categories.
Yeah. And if you tick many of the boxes, because we all know, if you're disabled, we all know that list of conditions, and the more boxes you tick, the more worried look they're going to give you, and that in itself just starts generating that stigma. And I think the fear of that stigma as well is a massive thing, not just for disabilities, but for all people who experience different forms of it. And it's a preventative for people accessing education. It's definitely something that's put me off. Like form filling in and of itself can be a complicated and tedious process for most people anyway. You add the fact that someone may have difficulty processing what the instructions are, or writing a clear response, or not dissociating for 6 weeks at a time, thinking an hour's gone and missing the deadline like I do. It makes those processes very, very difficult and challenging. And again, something where this is where politics comes in, because it's policies that create these things and create the ways in which they governed and run. So the only way to change them is to change the policies.
That's not going to happen in the next few weeks, few months, or maybe a few years.
No, I'd like to see, and again, this is probably very relevant. I'd like to see more people from non-political backgrounds who are from those different groups in society that aren't overly represented in local and national government. I'd like to see more of us, nominated and elected, because that lived experience for everyone is crucial to understanding how best to implement and help people.
I didn't realize that you could actually become a councillor or anything like that without like a degree in politics. I thought you had to study politics.
Neither did I.
I
didn't realise a county councillor had an allowance either. I put my name in for the hat. I went, yeah, Pete, just sign me up, go for it. I'll give them a run for the money. I didn't know until after I had been accepted as a candidate that the position I was standing for election was a paid position. I had no clue. I just thought I was going to give the Tories a run for the money.
Do you mean you get paid, or the oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not the same as a wage, because I'm not employed as such. It's community service, so it's an allowance that's paid. It's the same allowance to all county councillors. That's paid throughout the year for us. To cover expenses, time, working from home. I do an awful lot of meetings and appointments from here, and a lot of travelling up and down the county. And Powys is the largest geographical region in Wales, so it's quite a distance to travel one end to the other.
Oh yeah.
So we get an allowance to cover our time and our costs and our expenses and things like this. It works out at minimum wage doing part-time hours, about 12 hours a week. It's 14,000 for the year, just over, which isn't a lot. And this forms a barrier, actually, for a lot of people who are disabled or on low incomes, or, not from a position where they can just throw their name into the hat, because it's not a livable wage. You can't live on £14,000 a year and pay all your bills and things like this. So it is often seen as a role, as a second job for people who have already got a mainline income and things like this. And that in itself, I think, creating barriers and preventing people from putting their name in the hat, because it's like, well, yeah, I can be a county councillor, but that would be my only income, and that's not enough to survive on. And when you're disabled, it's even harder, because
travel takes,
as I found out in my my election campaign was so challenging physically, and it really made me realize how limited I am with my physical health, my physical disabilities, which I wasn't aware of before. And again, more barriers for disabled people to accessing democracy is things like simply like doing the election campaign. The traditional style is door-to-door knocking, and you'll do 4, 5, 6 rounds knocking on 1,500 houses. That's when you've done that multiple times, that's a lot of legwork. If you've got physical disabilities, or your mobility is not as great as other people's, that's, again, it shortens your ability to campaign and get out there. So there's definitely issues and things to be challenged and changed there as well. There wasn't really a plan for the type of challenge it would present to the team, and so it was a try and adapt and make accommodations as we went, and taking breaks as much as possible. But there was no plan, no idea, well, these are what we can do if somebody who's disabled tries to become a county councillor. Because not many people have before, so they've not needed those policies, they've not needed those guidances and those ideas. Again, something they need the lived experience to help them inform.
It's frustrating when there are jobs like that and people expect someone to have a degree or some sort of form of education around politics and kind of brush away the lived experiences, really.
I thought that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't get elected, because up until 2019, so the last general election, I was a non-voter. I wasn't interested in politics. I was an activist, and I would, very anti-politician, they're all the same, they're all liars, they're all in it for themselves. The rhetoric, we all hear it, we all say it. I was one of those all of my adult life up until recent years, when I realized if I want to change things, then it's politics that are governing everything. It's the law and politics that have the final say. So it's there where I need to change things in order to change this, to make them marry up.
I'm just curious, because us disabled community have heard the most ridiculous things about people who are disabled, whether it's a visible or an invisible disability. What's something that you've heard that you just couldn't believe your ears that you heard? Unless that's not an appropriate question.
Actually, there's so many. To be honest, I've paused, not because I'm struggling to think of one, but because there's so many.
Which one
that my brain's just suddenly flooded with so many comments that I've heard to myself or to other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've had people question whether or not I'm suitable to be a county councillor because I had a mental health breakdown. It's like, everybody, 1 in 5 throughout their entire life will have mental health challenges at some point. It's unavoidable. And it's that constant doubt that being disabled, and this is the one that gets me. You have a degree, but you're disabled.
Thank you. I've heard that so much.
I'm sorry. Does being disabled make me unintelligent? Like, I have, in this year alone, clocked 260 hours of structured continued development courses and a level 4 accredited diploma in psychological therapies while studying my master's degree. The idea that disabled people are stupid is the one that really grates on me, and the one that we're fragile and incapable. Just because we don't have the same capabilities as others doesn't mean we're incapable. And they're the two that I hear most often and really will get my hackles up. Especially the intelligent one. I really cannot tolerate this stigmatized view that disabled people are stupid, because it's quite the opposite. There's no correlation there, and it's heinous to manufacture and suggest it. I suppose that's why I collect so many certificates as I do, actually, to try and prove a point out of spite.
There's going to be a point in life where someone makes a comment about how you can't have an education, and you just throw your certificates at them, be like, here's proof for you. I'm honestly aiming to do that as well, because I've heard many comments and I'm like, I just want to shut you up.
Mental health has been a big part of your life. Mental health issues, studying psychology. What do you want to tell us? I mean, I'm just going to give you the floor here, a bit about your experience in mental health.
To be honest, again, it ties in with the lived experience we were talking about and what you've just said. It's been a big part of my life. I've struggled with mental health condition since my childhood. I've been in and out of the service since I was 11 years old, and it wasn't until I was 27 that I got a therapist through the NHS that was, one I could build a working relationship with. And so it's taken a long time for me to get the access to that level of support and treatment. Because as we all know, the NHS has been so underfunded and undervalued for so long that unfortunately the services are crumbling around us. And again, because my mental health was deteriorating so much, I was on the waiting list, waiting to see the therapist I'm now with when I enrolled at university, doing my psychology degree. And so it all kind of just merged together into one path. Like my life just led me down this way. And then COVID hit. And I think that was a big shock for everybody. Because of my mental health, I'd spent most of my 20s, my mid to late 20s, struggling with agoraphobia, as I mentioned previously. And so when COVID hit, I'd been in recovery for a few years, and all of a sudden it was like my irrational phobia because I still have some tendencies and avoidance of, big places and lots of people. And now COVID hit. There's a rational explanation for my irrational phobia, and everybody's getting shut down and locked away, and everybody's having a dose of post-traumatic stress disorder across the entire world. I think that's what we can surmise COVID to be for everybody, that isolation, that lockdown, the being cut away from our friends, our family, from the services we need as disabled people. It was a very difficult time for so many. And I think, like most people my age, I stumbled onto TikTok as a way to fill in the boredom. I started talking about my mental health and my journey, my personal journey there, through the service and surviving abuse and the impact of that on my mental and physical health as well. And somehow, unintentionally, ended up building a community of trauma survivors and people who struggle with their mental health or have mental health conditions. And over the last couple of years, that we've lost a couple of accounts because of me calling out ableism and racism and homophobia and the like. As I said, I'm very vocal and have zero tolerance for that. So we have had to re-establish the account a few times. And at one point we had 70,000 followers on the MF Network account, which stands for the Multifaceted Network.
I was thinking it meant something different.
Yeah, everyone thinks MF means something else. And we leave it MF for people to create their own.
Just clicked in my head.
Yeah. So this community became the MF Network. And it's more of a social hub. It was more of a social hub of people from across the world, all on TikTok, who came together during the lockdown sharing our lived experience, our insight, our coping mechanisms with one another, sharing what grounding techniques has helped so that we can, share those resources and tools. There's so many people who need access to the information and to the support and mental health service that can't get that access. So people like myself who have access to a therapist, those worksheets I get explaining what trauma is and how it impacts the brain, I'll put on a link tree and share with the community, so that we're sharing that psychoeducation of mental health and trauma. We share our stories with one another, and we share our ups and downs as well. We've very much become a community. I've become known as Auntie Little. I can be quite stern and very firm on keeping the community safe and protected, because we are very intersectional. We have people from different countries all over the world, so we have different cultures, and so we have to be mindful of people's different cultures, because what we understand one thing to mean and represent in one place but is different elsewhere, and so we have to be mindful of each other. We have to be aware of this, and we have to be respectful. We have people of different ages, different genders, different ethnicities, you name it. We're as varied as the disabled community is. Trauma community, like the disabled community, is one of the unrecognized, undervalued communities and marginalized communities in the world that any one person can become part of at any point in their life. You can become disabled like that in the flash of an eye, and you can suffer with trauma in the same way, and it can have lifelong impacts. And it's not exclusive to any one group of people at all. So the MF network has become a safe haven, a sanctuary, and a place of support and learning for people all over the world, from both communities, trauma and disabled, because you find, if being disabled in the world and society we have brings with it its own traumatic experiences.
Absolutely.
Being so isolated and stigmatized and discriminated against, like, oh, you're disabled, so you can't do this, you can't do that. You must be fragile, you must be weak, you must be stupid. It's a constant psychological barrage, and that has an impact on your mental health. And it very interwoven community there. You can't have a disability without some understanding of trauma.
Yeah, that's true.
Just
quickly, Little, I don't know if you wanted to mention the MF network.
A lot of people who seek the MF network out is because they've had difficulties with mental health, or they know someone who has difficulties with mental health, and a lot of people will signpost that account to other people in order for them to access my link tree. And I've just reorganized the link tree on the MF network account on TikTok to separate the information and support from the research and the science, because I do provide an extensive range of academic and peer-reviewed evidence-based research behind different areas and covering subjects like this, so people can learn and study. And so I don't mind the MF network being mentioned at all. It's very much, as well as being a community, it's a resource hub for people to access those tools and resources and information they might be seeking. So, and as a community, they're an amazing group of people. We've had a number of members who've had some difficulties and challenges in their lives. We had one member who unfortunately passed away last year, suicide, and we helped with the fundraising with that, and we do a lot of campaigning together as a group, as a community. I think we've raised for different causes and different people over the last 3 years, just over 15,000, between 15 and 20,000 pounds for different causes. And it's all through making TikTok videos and, you know, pushing them and duetting each other and just being a community, helping each other out. So yeah, there's always some petition or some fundraising campaign on the Linktree as well. So yeah, I'm happy with that being out there and being known. And if people want to find that space, a safe space for them to find people who are like-minded, or for them to access information on how they can help themselves or help somebody they know and love with challenges of their own, then that information is accessible for
them. Sorry, there's a long pause because I am trying to write and think and answer a question all at the same time.
It's something I struggle with, is note taking. And keeping a diary. That's one I've noticed since becoming a county councillor, is keeping track and putting the information into my calendar so that everybody knows when I've got a day available for different meetings. So one of the symptoms, as well as dissociation with my trauma disorder, is amnesia. So it's not like movie style amnesia. There's various different types, and there's, again, you hear these terms and people think of movie representations.
Which is awful.
It's not movie type amnesia where I can't remember anything. You know, sometimes I will have complete blanks, and so if I don't put the information in the calendar straight away, or if it comes in on a different device and I have to transfer it over or type it in, it doesn't get put in, and then my calendar's never up to date. And I miss appointments and meetings, and my brain doesn't tell me it's there, it's gone.
So is there any way that you get around all the amnesia? What coping mechanisms do you use for that?
I have tried so many different things, and it depends on what I need to remember, to be honest. So dates and appointments, I'll tend to scribble on a piece of paper, like my desk is covered in pieces of paper, and I'll just jot it down on a piece of paper. And I have a tendency to be able to remember the numbers. So I remember the date.
Just not what's happening on
the time, but I won't know what it's for, and I won't know what it's about. And if I don't write it down, you know, I'll remember the numbers, but I will forget what it's about if I don't put context in. And I'm still trying to figure out a system actually that works for scheduling my life, because up until now I've not had to do it, because, you know, I've been independent since I was 16 years old. I don't have any family or anything. My friends live 50 plus miles away, so I am very much isolated physically. And again, that's more of a trauma response, because it's safer to keep people at a distance. And so I'm used to being on my own and just being in the house all the time and not needing to schedule my life. So with university, I took the open university because it's distance learning. it's flexible. I can be up at 2:00 in the morning taking my class rather than having to get up, go on a bus, go to a campus, sit in class, go through a lecture, talk to my, classmates, get back home, and all of that traveling time and moving around and using of energy just to go there and do the study. It was more flexible and easier and adaptable to do it distance learning. And that's how I'm doing my master's degree as well, is distance learning. I do it from my laptop. So I can do it anywhere in the world at any time, day or night. And I have that sort of flexibility in my life up until becoming a county councillor. So I'm trying to figure out a system how to make all of these challenges and barriers dissolve, and how to adapt that schedule. And I've tried alarms, I've tried keeping diaries and journals, but the amnesia is a big challenge. I think it's going to get to a point where I may need a personal assistant to do the note taking and just the admin side of keeping the diary up to date. Because that's going to be, I think, my biggest challenge.
Let me just go back a bit to the university for a little bit. What's something that you wish someone has told you before starting uni?
That there is help there, but you have to advocate for yourself. I think that's something that's missing, is advocacy. Because there is the support, there is the funding, there is the resources, there's the tools, there's the adaptions there. But if you don't know how to explain what adaptions you need, if you don't have that ability to advocate for yourself, then you're not going to be able to access that. And I wish someone had given me that forewarning, because it wouldn't have taken me 2 years into my education before I went, help, I'm struggling. And just trying to get by. If I had known, not just how to advocate for myself, but that I could advocate for myself, would have made a big difference. And even having that service available within a university, an advocacy service, where you have someone who can help explain things and put things into your perspective when you struggle to do that for yourself. Because that was, again, it's been a learning curve, figuring out how to explain and figuring out what support and adaptions I do need and what's available, because they don't explain that to you.
Unless
they give you the list
for
of
that information, they won't tell you.
Yeah, unless you take the initiative of doing a deep dive on Google, you get a brief summary of, for example, these are some of the adaptions we can help you with, we can provide you with. But there's no explanation of what those things are, or what they do, or what they're for, or how they can help. They don't explain a lot of it. They just expect you to know. And that was a challenge.
And that's also frustrating for someone who's just starting university, who are entering very unknown territory. Like, you don't know the people within that space and that community. And I guess people need time to, one, adapt to new places, and then two, to know who to talk to.
Yeah. And I think that's where I had the advantage with distance learning and the Open University, because I didn't have to get used to a new environment. I didn't have to get used to the people around me, because other than the discussion forums, which I really, even now, even though it's part of my graded material, I struggle to engage with. Other than that element, it's very much independent learning. You're on your own. You can access your tutors and talk to your tutors and things like that, but the initiative's on you to reach out. And so I didn't have to get used to a group of people or get used to their names or know who was who. I just had to know who my tutor and my student fellow was, 2 names and 2 email addresses. And I didn't have to get used to new surroundings, new voices and things like that. So that took away a lot of that for me. I think if I had gone to a campus, it would have been a very, very different experience. And I'm not sure I would have completed my course, to be honest. Because of that reason, because I think it would have been too taxing on my energy levels to get to and from, to adjust to the new environments. You know, if there was a heated debate or something in the classroom, would I be able to cope with that? And yeah, I think taking away that extra use of spoons really is what allowed me to finish that education and do it on my terms, flexible. So you've not got that rigid schedule like 9 to 5, because when you don't have a brain that functions like the rest of the world, you don't function on a 9 to 5 like the rest of the world. So yeah, I think for campus it would have been very different, and those challenges would have been probably the biggest barriers, and would have potentially led to me not going on to my degree.
Can you just quickly explain what you mean by spoons, please?
So spoons, it's a very common theory that I can't remember where it originates from. And it's an evolving theory. So there's new theories being adapted from this, but essentially you start out with so many spoons, and all of the activities you do in the day cost so many spoons. So for some people who are able-bodied, neurotypical, you know, getting up, getting dressed, brushing their teeth, having a shower costs a spoon. But for someone with like
neurodivergency,
neurodivergency or physical disabilities as well, and even chronic pain, which I include with disabilities because it does disable you. Just getting out of bed can cost 2 spoons some days. You know, getting into the shower, getting dressed, getting your breakfast, all of those can cost 5 spoons. But if you've started out with 10 spoons, you've not even left your door before you're halfway through your spoons for the day. And so it's energy conservation and usage.
So the spoons are the energy levels that someone would use on a day-to-day basis.
Essentially, yeah. In the most simplest of terms. There are more extended theories that look at the fact that not all of the spoons for a disabled person are the same spoons. So you may have ladles, you may have a teaspoon, you may have you know, a long handle spoon. And if you've got a task which, say you want to have a bowl of cereal for breakfast, but you have a ladle, every time you're scooping that up, the milk's going to fall out of the holes. Because the spoon that you have for that task isn't suited for that task. So it makes it even more challenging, because you've got that challenge where the tools you have don't match with the task you need to complete it.
They don't always fit everyday tasks.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about that. I knew about
me neither, and I quite like that.
I will try and find the TikTok video that explained that one. I came across it last week and I was like, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good, you know, adaptation and evolution of this theory that began several years ago. And now there's, you've got this, but not all the spoons are the same. Not all of them fit the task. And if you've got this, then you've got to figure it out. You know? So that's what I mean by that. I often use a battery analogy as well. I have so much battery power during the day, and different tasks require different percentage of energy.
Yeah.
And I have to rest frequently to top that battery back up in order to keep functioning.
How comfortable do you feel getting into PTSD?
I'm fine talking about PTSD.
Okay.
It's one of the, so not only is it my life, my own personal experience, it's also my professional lifelong career that I'm heading towards, and my special interest. So I've kind of taken my life, my special interest, and just went, oh, let's make a career out of this.
The foundation blocks.
Yes. Using myself as an example.
So, can you just give us like a summary, maybe, of just PTSD and just, an overview if you can?
So, PTSD is a clinical diagnosis of someone who has a long-lasting impact after a traumatic event. So after an incident's happened, a lot of people will experience very acute levels of stress. And after a month, if these experiences and these symptoms haven't been processed, then we clinically define that as post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, there's a lot of different clinical diagnoses that connects to trauma in and of itself. And so that's one slither of a very broader topic, more specifically. And it's post-traumatic stress disorder is one of the most commonly understood trauma-related conditions that we know. It was, as we all understand, it was almost a century ago understood to be shell shock and something that veterans experienced going through the war. And this is how we became to understand post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder in its roots and its histories. And as time passes by, our knowledge and understanding of the world develops and evolves and advances with it. And our understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder has again advanced a lot further than it was back in the 80s. I can't give you the statistic off the top of my head, but it is a very relatively low statistic, somewhere between, I think, 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 people will experience at least one incident of trauma leading to post-traumatic stress in their lifetime. So it's a very common experience to have, and a very common diagnosis. But again, it's not often spoken about and not understood, really. And I think that's because it can be an uncomfortable topic. Because when we talk about trauma, we can be talking about anything. We can be talking about natural disasters. We can be talking about one-off incidences, such as a car crash or a very, life-threatening operation, for example, because surgery can be a very traumatic event. And what I think gets misunderstood is a very simple concept that trauma is trauma. And it doesn't matter the relative size or dramatics or severity or extremity of the incident that led to that in and of itself, it still has the same impact. Trauma is trauma, and it's subjective. So what's traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another. A good example of this is a husband and wife in a car crash. The wife 6 weeks later, is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. She's having flashbacks, nightmares. She's really struggling to process, and she's fearful of getting back in the car again. The husband has a very opposite. He's, back into the car. He's like, oh yeah, he's a bit shaken up, but a couple of weeks later, he's dealt with it. He's going back to work every day. He's not really thinking much of it when he gets into the car. And that's an incident where both were experienced together, and it was a shared traumatic experience, but only one of them experienced that as trauma and processed that as a traumatic event. And one of them didn't process it. And it's that unprocessing and not processing that traumatic event in our brains that can lead to clinical diagnoses like post-traumatic stress disorder, and those ongoing symptoms that we know come with it. So we can't compare one person's traumatic event or trauma story to another person's and say, well, they went through this, so that's worse than what this person went through, because it's subjective. It's how it was experienced and the impact on that person. And each of our trauma stories are unique and exclusive to us. And because we're the ones that experienced that and processed that ourselves the way we do, no one else can have the exact same experience because it's our experience. And so I do feel it's very common sometimes in the trauma community that gets forgotten about. Trauma is trauma, and you can be a veteran surviving war or a grown adult who didn't even realize that your childhood witnessing, I don't know, going through poverty, for example, had a traumatic impact on you. And I say that because we are living in a cost of living crisis right now, and poverty is a massive epidemic. It has been for many years here in the UK. And the science and the neuroscience and the psychology of what that does to people's, not just their mental health, but their development and their physical health, the impact of poverty is in of itself a traumatic experience. And it's, again, going to be a shared experience where a lot of us are going to be enduring over the next few years, and many people already have been. And it's such a traumatic impact on the brain that it's recognised as a adverse child event in the ACEs framework, because it can completely alter the child's social, emotional, cognitive and physical brain development, and have lifelong impacts leading to mental health difficulties in adult life. So again, trauma, post-traumatic stress, you can't put a comparison on one person's experience to another, but it is so understated on how impactful it is on someone's life, and not just on that one person's life, but on the people around them as well. And accessing the support to process that is very difficult. There's not enough trauma-informed services or practitioners around at the moment. It is becoming a path, a direction that I'm seeing not just health service, but local authorities starting to go down and implement trauma-informed approaches and practices.
Sorry, you got interrupted. What were you talking about, trauma-informed services?
Yeah, I always get on. So it's such a broad spectrum to talk about, and I could talk about this topic for hours. As I said, it's a special interest as well as being a career and a coping mechanism and everything else. But yeah, I'm starting to see the psychological and neurological community professionals looking into the research of trauma more prominently and its impact on physical and mental health, looking at the correlation between different mental health conditions and trauma and whether there's a root or a causation there. And this is being noted by local authorities and health services in how they can provide better services for people, which leads you back into politics and policy making. And there's this constant interwoven exchange between working in mental health and being in politics, and creating these trauma-informed services to help people who have, as I said, we've all gone through COVID. It was a global pandemic in which we all had a dose of trauma, and it was extended period of time, which takes it up to that post-traumatic stress. We still have people who are really concerned about leaving their homes because they know it's still floating about, and it is. People are terrified still, and it's had such a massive impact on people's health, on their social life, on their financial stability, which again impacts mental health. It's more trauma. And so, having been able to see the services implementing these new frameworks and heading towards creating a trauma-informed practices and approaches to their services, to the way they interact with their clients. And essentially, I'd love to see a trauma-informed society where we focus on those, on making things accessible without re-traumatizing and triggering people and stigmatizing them in the process. And this again will include the disability, because you can't have a disability without understanding and
Unfortunately, this bit of a recording got cut off, but I believe Little was talking about how you can't really experience disability without experiencing some trauma.
Is in itself so stressful and chronically stressful that it becomes a traumatic experience. And so if we can make that service trauma-informed, then it hopefully become disability-friendly, neurodivergent-friendly, and more marginalised communities that left unheard without a voice will start feeling like they can come forwards and put their head above the parapet and have their voice and have their say and influence a more unified society with less aggression.
I can see it's a domino effect. Once one person does something and influences another person, just going to flow naturally.
Yeah. I was always told growing up that I can't fix the world, and I've got to stop trying to fix everybody's problems.
Yes.
One person can't fix the world. And then since coming onto TikTok, actually, and I believe this came from First Nations people in America, one person can't fix the world, but one person in every village can. And that really resonated with me. And it was like, that's true. If one person in each village from each community takes a stand and raises their voice in every village, then that's all of those voices raised together in unison, and that becomes powerful. So I very much, one person can't fix the world, but one person in every village can. And I subscribe to that very wholeheartedly these days, and encourage people to, if you've got the power, if you've got the fire, if you've got the courage to let your voice be heard, shout it and scream it from the mountaintops. Like, I will give you a megaphone myself.
And thankfully, that megaphone is TikTok, I feel like.
Yeah.
Because now mental health is more widely spoken about, especially on social media. However, I don't think that translates well into the real world.
No.
We've still got quite a long way to go before we can even start making a dent into anything, really.
Yeah. And again, I think it's going to take more people with the lived experience getting the professional experience and academics behind them so that they understand that side and this side, and becoming a bridge between the community and the professional academic side of it, and merging and interweaving both of those together. And if we have more people with the lived experience who are the professionals, then they're going to be informing better services based on this rather than this. Because for all the textbooks in the world I've read on my own conditions, it doesn't even make the grade of explaining what it's like to live with that. And you can't get that in the service without that lived experience. So I'd love to see more people from our communities transitioning and being able to access that education, being able to overcome those barriers and have those adaptions to enable them to go into any field, and then we'll be able to have that lived experience interjected with that, and it should hopefully change the way things are done, because there'll be people who understand what it's like to actually live through this and live with these conditions and what adaptations are actually needed.
Yeah, it's frustrating being told that they can't do certain things because no one asks for them. No one raises their voice to say it. But yeah, I feel like the disabled community, although it's quite large, it's very quiet and muted, I guess you could say. Like, tell me the last time a huge news outlet or any sort of media outlet spoke about disabilities.
It's very few and far between.
It's very rare to see it.
There was this awareness when COVID hit that it was such a difficulty before. They couldn't set up remote working for people before because it was so difficult and so unmanageable, and no one would be able to work from home like that. Those adaptations were impossible.
But once
those adaptations would have enabled hundreds of thousands of people with disability to access employment and access education. And they were only implemented in COVID because they were needed by people who didn't actually need those adaptations for permanent life, just to exist. Whereas the disabled community had been shouting and screaming and saying, we need this. If you make it accessible, we can work.
Exactly.
And until able-bodied people needed that access, it wasn't put into place. And I see this with so many other communities as well. Until those at the top need it, the rest of us don't get. And we're dismissed and we're ignored and our voices are silenced.
Exactly.
And that in itself becomes a traumatic experience across the entire community. The disabled community has been silenced for so long that we struggle to amplify our voices now.
I also feel like we're being a bit silenced on social media. As you mentioned, you had quite a lot of accounts calling people out on their actions, and your accounts got flagged and got reported constantly. And that's the frustrating thing, because it seems like people want the disabled community to be quieted down, not to be seen or heard. I've heard a lot of older people, much older, like our grandparents or great grandparents, saying that disability people should not be seen or heard, which nowadays, when you would say that out loud, it sounds ridiculous to a lot of people.
But mind you, it's something we heard through COVID, wasn't it? It was like, well, why do we have to stay inside to protect disabled people? If they're going to catch this and it's going to be bad for them, then they can stay inside. It was like we didn't deserve to have a place in society. We shouldn't be allowed out because it's a threat to us, and why should everybody else suffer? Well, you can become part of this community at any time, love.
Well, it's also
anytime.
the same thing with vaccinations. Why should I get vaccinated to protect someone like them when they can just sit inside and not go out into the real world? Well, that's not how real life works.
Yeah, so you want to imprison and isolate people to make you comfortable.
I feel like some people are in their own fantasy world and they're trying to make it real, make it a reality.
We've become a very self-absorbed society over the last couple of decades.
COVID didn't help with that at all.
No, it really didn't. In some places it was fantastic. Like my own area, we saw the news reports coming ahead, and people in our local villages covering, I think it was a 30-mile radius, had established a community COVID response group by the end of February. So by the end of March, when we went into lockdown, it was already established to go, and it was set out in a way that every house on every street was covered, and there was a kind of a cell of people. So a group of volunteers would cover 5 streets, and there would be one person in that volunteer group that would be the lead, and they would come to someone in a wider circle, and we created these little groups interwoven. Would have looked like a fantastic Venn diagram if you drew it out, and managed to cover a 30-mile area with volunteers to help with shopping and pharmacy collections and things like this before the first lockdown hit. So though it was nice to see that community initiative and coming together to protect the elderly and the disabled and the vulnerable in our local area, and everyone really did pull together, and some of those are still running now. There's still some buddy services going and support services and volunteer groups still functioning today, helping people stay independent in their community. Good news stories, and I think not everybody was as self-absorbed as others were, and it was nice to see that community action together and community spirit, because I think that's very much been missing.
2 things that are still on my list. Going back to PTSD a bit, maybe we can sort of cover how that's different from CPTSD.
So in the simplest way to explain it, post-traumatic stress disorder typically comes after a singular event. CPTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, is a continued, often prolonged experience to chronic distress or trauma for many months or many years at a time, or several unprocessed traumatic events that are starting to compound on top of one another, and it becomes more complex than processing one traumatic event. You're now processing a extended, complex and multi-layered, multi-traumatic events in plural, and those will all have interactions on each other and on you. And so CPTSD is complex trauma, where you have a lot of unprocessed traumatic memories and events to process and work through, and having a much longer lasting impact on people. And it can have a different it looks very much like the same as post-traumatic stress in its symptomology. Diagnostically, it's typically more than one event, or multiple events, or often you see childhood abuse and childhood trauma defined as complex post-traumatic stress disorder, because this will be repeated events of the same trauma over many months or many years, and that in itself creates that complex change in the brain, in the body, in the mental health of the child.
And the last thing is a nice light subject to finish us off. How's the hedgehog?
So the 2 hedgehogs that we have had, Taryn was put into the rehab run and released last week. There has been sightings of her. She's been coming back to the release run to eat on the biscuits that still get put out there every night. She's been caught on the wildlife camera coming back. And the other one, Thorin, he got released 2 days ago in the back garden where he was found. We've actually spent the last 4 days digging out and renovating the garden to make it the top end dog proof to allow the hedgehogs to nest and my dogs won't be bringing me hedgehogs in the middle of the night now, hopefully. But yeah, they both went up to weight, both of them clear of all bugs and parasites and on the way to rummaging and foraging, getting ready for hibernation. So we're very happy with how that turned out.
Yes. Julie, did you know about the hedgehogs or?
No. I was like,
okay.
what are you guys on about? For 2
context.
seconds, I was like, okay.
Yeah, I used to, before COVID, I was a volunteer at the local hedgehog rescue. And they're retired now, but they still had some resident hedgehogs in captivity there. And then a couple of months ago, I let the dogs out to go do their business before going to bed, and one of them brought me a baby hedgehog. And because dogs' teeth can actually cause a lot of damage, especially to young hoglets, she had to be taken into care. Fortunately, I'm trained and experienced in dealing with these wild animals. So when I phoned the centre around the corner, they went, "Yeah, we'll give you the equipment. You can look after it yourself. We know we know you know what you're doing." So I set up my living room as a temporary hedgehog rescue for the last few months.
Little hospital.
Yeah, little hedgehog hospital. And just as I released one hedgehog back into the wild after it was rehabilitated, 24 hours later, my dogs brought me another one.
And I think your dog's like, but I bought you a present. Why are you taking it away?
But
a cat would do that more than a dog, to be honest with you. Because I know cats like to bring things in, but
yeah. The first one was just trying to picked it up in her mouth. I've got a terrier. Just brought it in and dropped it at my feet and looked up to me like, "It's a ball. Let's play fetch." How did you carry a spiky thing in your mouth? Like it hurts my hands just holding it.
Aren't baby hedgehogs not born with like very hard spikes? They're quite. No?
They're born bald, and the spines are actually hairs that harden. So
they
they're
had
born.
To be in quite a few days old, then a couple of weeks old before they bought it. Similar
to kittens and puppies. The first minute they're born, they don't have a lot of fluffy fur. It takes it, but you've got the imprint of the. It's just the skin. You can see the outer surface of the skin, and it's very pink. And as they grow, they'll get these tiny little white hairs coming through. And they'll eventually grow, and they'll molt. They'll molt those spines and slowly start regrowing them, and they'll harden and thicken. Yes, very sharp. Very sharp teeth. Like you don't want a hedgehog bite.
That sounds like you've by experience.
Ooh, yeah. Ooh. And every hedgehog is different. Like some hedgehogs will go into a freeze response and just not move. Other hedgehogs will get defensive and they will bite. Like one of the hedgehogs at the rescue, Louis, without fault, as soon as you put your hand inside the hutch to start cleaning it out every morning, he would dive out and try and bite you. And he would grab the rag and you'd be like this, trying to get the washcloth off the hedgehog. and playing tug of war with the hedgehog every morning because you've gone in its cage to clean it out.
And then I bet everyone at the rescue's like, so who's cleaning out this cage?
Everybody,
because I'm not doing it.
Everyone who's new to the centre was like, oh, like, I don't want to do that. You can do that one. And we all avoided Louis at first. But the hedgehog next to it, open the cage, she'd waddle out and she'd, oh, hello. And she'd jump out the cage and roll into your arms and just look up at you like, hi. She just loved attention.
Dogs and cats, just depends on your personality.
Yeah, like the two I've had for two very different hedgehogs. Like,
I just thought
Karen was very chilled and
was to roll up, and that was it.
No. People forget that they're wild animals, and they're insectivores, so they have sharp teeth to bite through beetle shells and things like this. And if they bite you, they bite you, and they carry some very nasty parasites. Worms, beetles. They eat slugs. They shouldn't eat slugs because there's some parasites in slugs that can be transferred to hedgehogs and make them sick, like lungworm, for example. But yeah, a lot of the food that they eat is insects and bugs, and they'll dig through the ground to find it. So during droughts and very hot, dry weather like we've had, the ground hardens and they struggle to find food. Add that to people using pesticides and slug killer pellets in their garden, that gets into the bugs, and then when the hedgehogs eat the bugs, they get poisoned as well. So it's one of the reasons why I push for hedgehog conservation. We had a population of 30 million back in 1950, and there's now around about 1 million. Yeah, we've lost a majority of our population, hedgehog population. They're actually on the red list for vulnerable to extinction at the moment.
Because of pesticides.
Pesticides, habitat destruction, hedge maintenance, predators like dogs and badgers, road traffic. And a very common one is gardening. People getting their mowers and their strimmers out, trimming the hedgerows without realizing that there might be hedgehogs nesting with babies or hibernating or sleeping underneath their hedges, and they'll come out in summer and spring and they'll do their gardens. And I've seen a number of hedgehogs with amputations and things like that because they've got caught up in a strimmer. I've actually seen more hedgehog injuries from garden maintenance equipment than I have on the road. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that have caused the decline and made the habitat very impoverished. But if you head to Hedgehog Street online, there's loads of information and surveys and information on how you can help in the local area and make your garden hedgehog friendly, which is exactly what we've been doing the last few days since the dogs brought me some.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome.
Councillor Little, who is a councillor in Wales, unexpectedly. I didn't know that.
Unexpectedly.
Well, yeah.
I was thinking like, it's the UK, yay!
Yeah.
England.
I'm the first openly non-binary county councillor for Wales too. So
congratulations.
Yeah. I didn't realise that we've had a mayor in Wales, and I believe we've got a transgender MP in the Tory party, but we've not had a transgender non-binary in county council till now. So
good achievement. That's Councillor Little, who is now a politician, a councillor in Wales. Thank you very much for giving up some time in your very, very busy schedule. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's been nice.
Councillor Little, thank you so much for giving up your time to speak with us. It's been wonderful having you. Check below in the description for their social media profiles, in particular their TikTok and check their bios for those resources. We'll have one more episode in this series, but until then, that's it for me, George Russ.
And I'm Gia Shenko.
And we will see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye.